civilization of Egypt and of Africa in general is the most written about and the least understood of all known subjects. This is not an accident or an error in misunderstanding the available information. Except for Egypt, African people have been written out of the respectable commentary of history. Europeans have claimed the non-African creation of Egypt in order to downgrade the position of African people in world history. They have laid the foundation of what they call Western civilization on a structure that the Western mind did not create. In doing so, they have used no logic. Egypt, a Nile Valley civilization, was already old before Europe was born. Nile Valley civilization also existed before the Western Asian civilization of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. This fact was acknowledged for years by the European academic hypocrites who thought they had gotten away with claiming Egypt as a European or at least Asian creation. The archaeological research of Europeans disproved their claim. They cannot find a single artifact in Western Asia or in mainland Asia that was older than the artifacts of Nile Valley civilization or Africa in general. This revelation created a new dilemma for the European claimers of Egypt. They were saying, in effect, figuratively speaking, a child gave birth to himself, then he created his own mother.
Back in the day when I was schooling, blind and unwise to the lies my professor was spewing forth like it was written in stone, I didn't know that under him, the truth was unknown. The power's in the knowledge.
One thing that is indubitably clear is that Africa is the cradle of the entire human race. From 4 million years ago all the way up to 200,000 years ago, the stepwise sequence leading in an evolutionary progression from early pre-human hominid ancestors all the way up to modern human beings occurred in Africa and Africa alone. Not that there weren't any migrations out of Africa, but those migrations did not have any impact on human evolutions leading up to modern human beings until after our human beings in fact left Africa. Now what do I mean by that? A man by the name of Wainscott from England has said is that all of the populations around the globe are descendants from small founder populations that left Africa probably no later than 100,000 years ago. This means that, as C.W. Stringer has said, that all 6.5 billion people on this planet are Africans under the skin. Because if we go back far enough, everyone has
Africans with jet black faces once walked the earth all alone, no other races, until he traveled to the other lands colder than the motherland, and then the cross began.
Superiority or inferiority. And so for approximately how many years
man traveled as he
was the world populated exclusively and only by Africans, black Africans? Okay, black skin. You're talking about the modern, the last African, okay, because you see, the African is not only the first hominid, he's also the first human. Okay, the hominid is not completely human like us, but then comes the first human without brain case, that's also African. And this begins to change about 55,000 years ago in Europe, where you get Africoid types becoming Caucasoid types.
Once again, this woman would have been how old now?
250,000 years old. Now, just by way of comparison, the oldest Homo sapiens sapiens bones that we find in Europe are 50,000, about 40,000 to 50,000 years old. This is the Grimaldi skeletons that were found in the Grimaldi cave.
So you have the African, how long ago now?
You have the African at least 200,000 years before they moved to the European continent.
And the European comes on the scene when?
Well, the African comes on the scene in Europe approximately 50,000 years ago. In other words, the first European was an African too, and is still an African. It's just an African who has changed.
And once again, what happened to that African once he got to Europe?
Well, you had several ice ages that and a change in environment, and the theory is that the change in environment, and especially the ice age part of it, being cut off from the African continent, having a completely different environment with respect to diet and climate and all those things, resulted over a 20,000 year period in physical changes, genetic mutations to adapt to that particular environment. And about 20,000 years or so ago, we have changes sufficient that we look and see distinct people when they really aren't distinct in that sense, in the sense of having groups that can't interbreed. That's what one of the biological definitions of race is, that groups can't, you know, a dog and a cow can't have offspring, so they would be different strains, but varieties of the same family, so that the European that resulted was merely a depigmented African.
That's when the frost began, the pigment loss began. The further north this man traveled as he crossed new land. The man in the ice who once walked in the sand, soon he began to lose his tan. Yet on the inside, he was still African.
But what's important is that when Kemet appears in the human record, it appears in 3100 BC with a fully developed civilization. Writing was already in place, astronomy was already in place, they already had the 365-day year calendar and 1 quarter for the leap year and all of that. That calendar had actually been put in place around 4236 BC, so we're talking about a fully developed, high technical civilization.
It's true.
The powers in the knowledge.
Determine the circumference of the Earth unless you had, of course, presupposed that the Earth was round. We want to point that out. All of the mathematics that we study today has its roots in Africa. We can start off simply with counting. The very first or the oldest known artifact in mathematics is the Ashango bone. That's over 8,000 years old. It's from the Congo. That's found in Africa. If we go ahead, they had developed fractions. Furthermore, they had developed algebra and, of course, geometry, trigonometry, and it even gone as far as the roots of integral calculus, and this is all before Europe existed.
The pyramid rises to a height of 481.5 feet. It is built of 2.7 million blocks of stone. The smallest stone is 2.5 tons, and the largest stone is somewhere between 70 and 100 tons. If you were to take the intact masonry of the Great Pyramid, by the way, can you hear me in the back? I don't want you to miss any of this. If you could take all of the intact masonry of the Great Pyramid and cut it up into 1-foot blocks, you could build a wall that would circle 2/3 of the globe. And you know they built it without even using the wheel? They used to float 1,000-ton blocks of granite from Aswan 500 miles down the river, and they can't even do that today. The pyramid was oriented precisely to the 4 cardinal points. The base of the pyramid, the side of each base of the pyramid was 755 feet, 6 inches, with an average error of 1/10,000th. The casing stones that covered the pyramid were so finely jointed that you could not and cannot insert a piece of your hair in between the joints, even today, where they are still in existence. The area of the base of the pyramid is 13 acres. But it's real interesting. If you look at the height of the pyramid, it is, if you measure it, it is the radius of a circle that you can create by turning the base of the square base of the pyramid into a circle. And therefore you can find the square base by the area of the perimeter of the square base by 2 pi r. So that means they had built the constant, the geometric constant of pi, into the pyramid. The descending passage was precisely aligned to to the North Pole star that was in place 3,350 years BC, and it used to shine down to the grotto and into a pool of water. And of course, it's only in that place once every 26,000 years. The so-called ventilating shaft of the King's Chamber oriented exactly to Orion in the southern heavens, and the one from the Queen's Chamber is oriented exactly to Sirius, also in the southern heaven. There has never been anything like it in the world. Nothing. Do you know the other thing about the Great Pyramid? Where the Great Pyramid sits, if you were to take all the longitude, there are 360 degrees of longitude around the Earth, right? The longitude of the Great Pyramid goes through more landmass than any other longitude in the world. The latitude of the Great Pyramid, going right through the Great Pyramid, goes through more latitudinal landmass than any other latitude in the world. So the Great Pyramid, from the point of view of land, is the center of the Earth. This is the reason why that not only in Egypt, but in Greece, Rome, Palestine, India, and China, build their cities in fixed intervals to the Great Pyramid. The Great Pyramid was the prime meridian. The prime meridian we got now going through Greenwich, England, is a complete artifact. It's not based on anything. The original prime meridian was the Great Pyramid. Next slide, please.
Great Pyramid, y'all.
Ayo. Ayo, ayo, ayo. Ayo, jalan.
Great Pyramid. Can't believe I'm here. This is all the folks. Beautiful thing. One people on a mission of truth. You can't believe what they said about you.
Like ancient Kemet, a good bit of the Dogon star and calendar system centers around Sirius. Sirius is the brightest star in the heavens. This is a great time at this time of year to see it, because it's really most brilliant in the winter sky. All you do is you look at the southern heavens right about now, look for Orion, and look for the three belts of Orion, and follow it right down, and there Sirius is. Outside the solar system, the brightest of the heavenly bodies. And the source of the calendar, ancient calendar of Kemet and the Dogon. The Dogon have 4 calendars also. One of them is based on Sirius. But what is more interesting from the point of view of Dogon is that they have a system around this body right there. These are artifacts. These are not, but this is actually a star. That star is called, by modern scientists, Sirius B. The Dogon call it P.T.A.H, the seed star or the star of deep beginnings. Well, what about P.T.A.H called Sirius B? The Dogon have apparently known about it for 700 years. It was not discovered in the West until 1862. The reason why it was so difficult to see is because it is a white dwarf star. The Dogon call it a white. What is a white dwarf? A star, when our sun, or a star the size of the sun, comes to the end of its life and exhausts its fuel, it will first expand into a red giant, and the sun will gobble up the entire solar system as far as Mars. But then it will become so big that it will have to collapse down. And it will collapse down in a mighty explosion to a white dwarf. So the sun will become the size of maybe the moon. So all that mass is concentrated in a small body. The weight of a single teaspoon of a white dwarf like Sirius B is about 100 tons, because it's so small, dense, and heavy. The Dogon describe all of this. They describe Sirius B as being a white seed is what they call it. It's very small, very dense, and very heavy. The Dogons say that it is composed of a metal not found on Earth they call Sagala, and it has been determined through spectrographic analysis that is exactly what it is composed of, a degenerate metal. They even describe, you see, when a red giant explodes to contract down a white dwarf, that is a nova explosion. It lights up the sky. The Dogon described that. The connections between white dwarfs and supernovas weren't even known until 1914. The Dogon even describe matter being made up of incredibly small spinning particles, i.e. atoms. They describe all of the constellations of being composed of countless of stars spinning in space as galaxies. They describe the 4 moons of Jupiter, and these people, to all intents and purposes, don't have even a system of writing that we know about. At least not one that anyone has ever discovered. They have, therefore, a knowledge of the cosmos and of the heavens and astronomy that rivals modern knowledge. This was found in Saqqara, dated to 300 BC, and at first was said to be a bird, until a NASA engineer said, next slide please, birds do not have reverse dihedral wings and vertical tails. So this is a glider and an aerodynamically sound glider. Not an airplane, but it just shows you that in African science they had already started experimenting with aerodynamics 300 years before Jesus was born. So again, why are we afraid to be engineers?
Back in the day when I was schooling, blind and unwise to the lies my professor was spewing forth like it was written in stone. I didn't know that under him, the truth was unknown.
Research and other research. And that is why Egypt had to be claimed by the Europeans. That's why the Europeans had to make Egypt a European country, a white country, in spite of the fact. In spite of the fact. But you, in trying to become and make yourself equal, everything got to be equal. I'm not equal to nobody. I am it. To learn mathematics, and I gave the world 1 to 9. When the world didn't have anything, I was counting. I had a written language I call Meduneta, the writing of the gods. There was no Greece and no Etrusca and no Pyrrhus yet. That later became Rome and Greece. When I was going into chemistry, I left my writing in 100 of them that now they even call the Rockefeller papyrus, the Edwin C. Smith medical papyrus. This Edwin C. Smith is a surgical papyrus dealing with the operation in the human spine, 1700 BC, 700 years before Rome or Greece. And he claimed the creation of Rome and Greece. I can do more in proving to you that Rome and Greece was not Europe than anybody else can prove that Egypt was not Africa. Rome and Greece was not Europe. Two Mediterranean-inspired nations, because when they rose, there was no Europe. That's hard on your imagination. What created Europe? The challenge of Rome and Greece. Fighting Rome and Greece, they got themselves together to fight it or try to destroy it. Getting themselves together to fight this challenge made them a nation. They began to have facsimile nations, and they weren't even clear on the nation concept in Europe until near the end of the 18th and the 19th century. And you actually know, here's the people who came in the world civilized. And Europe was born when the ancient world was ending at the beginning of the modern world. There was no Europe in ancient times.
Documents we can read very easily, and there may well be independent confirmation of the historicity of some form of a Trojan War in those documents. And so what I'm really asking is, why is it that we're just really looking in one direction when we're talking about the origins of Greek civilization?
When Alexander entered Egypt, he wrote home to his mother and said that he at last reached the land where the Greek gods began, Apollo and Zeus. And he wanted to consult one of the great African teachers of oracles. And the oracle asked, "How old is this man?" He said, 32. They said, in 20 years, maybe he'll be wise enough to ask me a question that I care to answer. In studying, I started to go back to God's rock. And then I came back and forth and find out, why are you such hypocrites? Tomorrow you're going into Sunday you're going into your church, and you're going to call on the God, your ancient God, and don't know it. Next time I'm saying you're going to say the only one to free you is Jesus, but you call him Ammon. You don't know that you're still calling an Ammon-Ra, because somebody lied to you and said it means so be it. It doesn't mean so be it. Ammon was the god of the north of Egypt, or the lower Egypt. Ra was the god of southern Egypt. When the hero of the south, Nama, otherwise called Mena, defeated the hero of the north to unify the land, Scorpion, and he won, he joined the two names, Ammon-Ra.
And now that I know what I gotta do, I know what I gotta do. Gonna spend the rest of my life telling the world the truth about you. Maybe they'll understand we owe it all to you. We owe it all to you, motherland, my sweet motherland, sweet Africa, motherland, sweet motherland, sweet motherland, Africa. We owe it all to Africa.